One of the lead architects at Trump's Project 2025 called Hungary not just a model for right-wing statecraft, but the model. Well, the people of Hungary spoke loudly and clearly this past Sunday, absolutely crushing Viktor Orban in the national elections and delivering the pro-democracy opposition a super majority. Leah, it's What's the Plan? And we're here to talk about building our own pro-democracy movement to crush our own fledgling autocrat electorally. What specifically are we talking about today?
Well, in addition to lessons from Hungary, we have got a national day of action against Trump's concentration camps next week. We have got a national day of no work, no school, no shopping on May Day in a couple weeks. We've got Trump's spiraling fiasco of a war in the Middle East, and we have got the utterly relentless humiliation of J.D. Vance on the national and international stage. And as always, we have got a live Q&A about politics, strategy, organizing, and what we can actually do. So welcome to What's the Plan? I'm Leah Greenberg, co-executive director of Indivisible.
And I'm Ezra Levin, the other co-executive director of Indivisible. And Leah, you are by far the international relations expert between the two of us. So I'm really eager for you to teach us some lessons to learn from Orban's downfall. But before we get there, I want to tell this instructive story from America's own backyard. So this week, I want to take you to Montrose, Colorado. Montrose, Colorado, this is a town that is represented by freshman Republican U.S. Representative Jeff Hurd. Jeff Hurd, if you've never heard of Jeff Hurd, you're not alone, folks. You're not alone, but he is a Republican freshman from this district. He's a former corporate lawyer. His background is kind of as a guy who worked for the bad guys from Captain Planet. So Hoggish Greedley, Luton Plunger, Dr. Blight, Sly Sludge, those guys, he's kind of their lawyer. That's who he is. And he got himself elected to Congress in a Republican-leaning district in 2024. He ran 5 points behind Donald Trump, but he won. And since he won it, he's done basically everything he can to avoid actually facing his constituents who live in Colorado's 3rd congressional district. More than a year ago, he was being asked by locals that, hey, can he actually show up? Can he actually talk to us? Can he hold a town hall? And he was getting this question so much, the local news covered it. And they asked him, and here, I'll give you a quote, what he said more than a year ago. He said, finding the right venue and the right place and the right time is something I'm definitely interested in. That was more than a year ago, y'all. And you know how it is to schedule really anything. It's just so tough and time flies. But what do you know? More than a year has passed, and still, Jeff Hurd has not held a single public town hall in the 3rd congressional district of Colorado. And he's frankly doing what a lot of Republicans are doing right now, because Republicans aren't riding high right now. Trump is not riding high right now. He and others, they're keeping their head down. They're trying to avoid headlines, and they're just hoping that the backlash against this regime doesn't hit him too in the midterms. And look, Jeff is many things. He's not an idiot. He's not an idiot. Look, the bad guys from Captain Planet don't just hire any fool to represent their corporate profiteering, right? Hurd went to Notre Dame and University of Denver and Columbia University. He's a smart cookie, right? And this strategy of hiding from constituents, I know some folks on this call might call it cowardly. I know, look, in the rural areas that he represents, kind of like the rural areas I grew up, they might call it chicken shit. But I will tell you, I think Hurd would call this politically astute. And I think there's something to that, because the reality is most people are not paying attention to what their member of Congress is doing. That's just reality. And if all his office is doing, all his campaign is doing is putting out propaganda and meeting with supporters and donors and sounding reasonable in press releases, look, that can be enough to fool the voters into thinking, Hurd's all right. I'll vote for Jeff again. In a Republican-leaning district, even in a wave year, that might be enough to keep your seat. So it makes sense what Jeff Hurd is doing. And this was all going to plan until earlier this month. He was holding a hush-hush meeting with supporters and donors out in Montrose. And I will read you what happened next, because it is covered in the headline of the Montrose Daily Press. And it says, and I quote, "Indivisible group confronts Hurd in Montrose." That's the headline. This comes from Montrose and Ouray County's Indivisible. They found out about this hush-hush meeting that was coming together, and they threw together very rapidly this emergency mini protest just to meet their own damn member of Congress face to face, to actually be able to ask him some questions. And they managed to get to him. And they had very reasonable questions. They asked about immigration enforcement. They asked about the war. They asked about the SAVE Act. They asked about the Epstein files. They actually got to have some back and forth with their member of Congress who does not actually want to be talking to them, but couldn't just back away in that moment. And one of the things they asked him for was specifically to hold a damn town hall, but they were very nice about it, nicer than I would have been. And the journalists followed up with Hurd's office, and you know what he said? He said, "Oh, but I'm holding all these teletown halls where people can call in." And I will tell everybody listening here, as somebody who has helped run teletown halls, I can tell you they're bullshit propaganda operations. Teletown halls are a tactic that elected officials use to give the appearance of listening to constituents, but then they weed out all the tough questions so that they don't actually have to face tough questions. So look, if you have a Republican member of Congress, anything less than like a ruby red district where they're super safe politically, they're probably hiding from you right now. And that's a strategy they will employ as long as we let them. So my message to Hurd would be, it's time to put your big boy britches on and do your job. You should go and defend Trump's tariffs, go and defend his economy and his wars and his prices and his cuts to Medicaid, his closing of rural hospitals. You can do that. That's your party's position. It's fine to hold those positions. You can do that. It's still a democracy, but you shouldn't be hiding from your constituents. And if you are hiding from your constituents, you're going to run into a lot more groups like Montrose and Horry County, Indivisible. And that's the way to not just forfeit this opportunity to make your voice heard and not just wait until the election to try to vote this guy out. Because, like I said, most of the time, most people are not paying attention to politics. But a lot of people read the Montrose Daily Press earlier this month, and they learned that they've got a coward for a congressman, and they might be looking for something else in November. So congrats to Montrose and Horry County's Indivisible for jumping into this, making your voices heard. I hope it inspires more people around the country to do the same. Now, Leah, that's a small skirmish in our own backyard, right? And I have to say, the international news has been incredible over the last week. And I've just loved reading basically every single piece of news I can get from Orban's downfall. You could say I'm hungry for more. As a side note, Leah said I got one bad pun, and that's it. Okay, I'm done.
You get one pun, one hungry pun.
Okay, I'm done. Tell us what down in this bastion of right-wing authoritarian statecraft, Leah. Tell us what happened.
Yeah. So I just want to take a step back and say it is so hard to stress what a big deal Orban's defeat, his massive defeat by his loss of a supermajority in Hungary. What a big deal this is in the global fight for democracy. Viktor Orban is the archetype of competitive authoritarianism. When we talk about how the global right is constantly learning from each other, he is perhaps the single most important teacher and patron of that international exchange. Over the last 16 years, he has built up a profoundly rigged system in Hungary. He rigged the maps, he rigged the judiciary, he corrupted the state infrastructure, he took control of the media. Power and money and control have been redistributed almost entirely to his allies. He has built this firewall against any kind of democratic accountability. And on Sunday, it came crashing down. Now, a central part of the story is, of course, the economic deterioration of Hungary. The corruption of the regime has translated into terrible mismanagement and economic conditions for regular people. It has got the worst inflation in the EU, crumbling hospitals, last place in the EU for household wealth. But in a state where the government controls the media overwhelmingly, bad conditions do not automatically translate into a loss of power. Orban has perfected the divide and conquer playbook, the going after immigrants and dissidents and Jews and more. He certainly kept trying to deploy that. What changed this time compared to previous elections was a combination of disruptive realignment following scandal and tireless, inspired hyper-local organizing to create the conditions in which the Orban playbook backfired. The new prime minister, this is an interesting kind of specific set of circumstances here. The new prime minister does not come from the traditional opposition parties, which, according to many of our friends in Hungary, were largely discredited by kind of the ongoing failures to make breakthroughs. He is a defector from Orban's own coalition, someone who broke following a series of extraordinarily horrifying scandals in 2024. That has created the conditions for this realignment and repolarization. Everybody in the tired, corrupt old regime versus everybody who is against corruption and wants a Hungary that works for its people. Underneath that has been this extraordinary people-powered movement. new opposition has gone everywhere, campaigned everywhere. The new party has been building local chapters that they call islands, not just in Budapest, but in really small towns where there has historically been no opposition presence. They've been publishing a volunteer-delivered newspaper for voters who have only been getting the pro-government media for an extended period of time. On election day, they deployed 50,000 poll watchers to protect the election conditions. And I just want to linger on that because 50,000 would be like a lot of people in America. In Hungary, that is 1 in every 200 people who was out there protecting the conditions for the election.
Wild.
It is wild. And of course, they mobilized in truly enormous numbers, if you have seen the pictures from the weekend. I'll just take one step back on this because we've been talking about Hungary and we've been talking about creating the conditions for this moment for a while, right? As of last year, we were talking about the Budapest Pride Parade as this breakthrough moment. If you will remember, Orban has a long history of attacking and escalating his attacks on LGBT people, and he functionally tried to ban the Pride Parade in this classic, the things are getting worse for me, so let's find a marginalized population to pick on move. Rather than being cowed, organizers recognized this as a crucial moment to make this repression campaign backfire. They went bigger. They leaned in on a collective message of freedom and solidarity. They turned it into a referendum, not just on Orban's attacks on LGBT folks, but on what he had done to democracy and life in Hungary and their relationships across the board. They called his bluff.
Leah.
Yeah.
Leah, you're saying that they didn't just throw trans folks under the bus in order to take down the authoritarian? Wow. What?
I know.
Who would have thunk?
Who would have thought? No, and in doing so, one, they delivered this extraordinarily and powerful message of solidarity, but two, what do we say? Courage is contagious. They disrupted his aura of control and inevitability, and they created the conditions in which large numbers of people were inspired to organize and push back. Does any of this sound familiar to anyone here?
Vaguely.
All right. Vaguely, right? And I'll just one last thought, right? So JD Vance was in Hungary over the weekend or on Friday campaigning for Orban's party. Keep on winning, JD Vance, right? But that's for a reason, because the ties between the American conservative movement and Orban go very, very deep. There are a lot of very sad and very scared people in MAGA world this year. Just last year, they were all partying together at CPAC, which we have now learned was actually being funded by Hungary. And now they're getting worried, and they should be worried because the party is coming to a close and the bill is coming due. And that is true for anti-democracy forces in Hungary, and that is true for anti-democracy forces in the United States. So this is a good week for that global fight.
Just to underline something you said, Leah, because I think it's important for us right now, too, that the opposition party now that just won, the pro-democracy party that won a supermajority, it is not the same party that was trying to take on Orban 4 years ago.
Right.
And in fact, that party was thoroughly discredited because it lost. And everybody said, well, they're losers. We don't want to back these losers. And so they look for a new leader. As we think about Democratic primaries right now, there's a reason why Indivisible is explicitly looking for Democrats who are fighters to replace an old failed version of the Democratic Party, because we think it's important that people not just dislike Trump, dislike the regime, dislike the Republicans, but are inspired by a version of the Democratic Party that they can actually believe in, and that we don't just try the same thing again and again and again and expect people to just default to us because they don't like the regime.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I would also say, there's the ideological spectrum, and then there's how much people trust the existing system, how much they trust the existing establishment. And so it's not just tapping into, a specific vein in the ideological spectrum. It's also about whether you can make a credible case that what you are doing is a break from business as usual. And that is an energy that we have got to be able to tap into on our side if we are going to pull voters, not just anti-Trump, but collectively to believe in something that is better.
That's right. Let's try to believe in something that's better, and we'll do that by talking about how we build towards that vision with the top voted question. So headed into questions, Leah, let's jump into Q&A. The very top question today comes from Hope. I love to start with Hope. Hope from Target Majority NYC. My members are excited about May Day, and we have the strike readiness training at a meeting, but the demand call to action feels really vague. In January, Minnesota turned out to strike during an emergency with a crystal clear and salient demand of ICE out now, which drove us all to show up for no work, no school, no shopping. We know we need to strike to build towards protecting our midterm wins, but what's the message or demand for May Day that will make massive numbers of people want to strike and recruit tons of others to join them? And just to note that the survey that we sent out last week to folks who are listening, we had just tons of responses. Really appreciate everybody. What we found is overwhelmingly people are planning to participate in May Day, which is great to hear in various forms. And also there were a lot of specific requests for either resources or training or talking points. And this is actively helpful to Indivisible's nationals team because we are trying to best prepare to support y'all doing this. So just a shout out to everybody who took the time to go through that, provide that information. We are working now through that to try to provide some good intel. But Leah, do you want to talk to, there is a difference between mobilizing when the election is directly under threat or when ICE is in your community and mobilizing as a structure test. I think Hope raises a good issue here.
Yeah, and it is a good question, and it is something that we grapple with ourselves, right? Anytime we're setting an action well in advance and trying to build towards it, there's a bit of a question mark about what is the national environment we're operating in, whether we're in a peak wave moment or whether we're in a little bit of a calm moment, right? And when we're doing something like this, we are aiming for an overarching call to action that builds and holds as many people as possible. Now, May Day, the call to action is workers over billionaires. There are specific demands underneath that, but fundamentally, this is about working people who are increasingly stretched, who are getting screwed over in every possible way by a government that is taking their money and sending it to wars abroad. That there's able to find money for bombs, but not money for healthcare, and that is doing favors for billionaires instead of actually serving its people. And that is a collective story where I would encourage you to find which piece of that is the one that is mobilizing for your community and lean into it, right? Because fundamentally, what we are trying to tap into and what we are trying to talk to people about is the fact that workers' lives in America should be better. And they are not better because there is this extractive class of billionaires who formed a tight alliance with the government in order to profit while our lives get worse. That's going to be expressed in a lot of different ways. But the collective ask of we're going to show our power and we're going to demonstrate that actually, all of your power relies upon us. That is the core theory and the core logic underlying May Day. Now, it's also, as you note, a structure test for the midterms. Structure tests are not necessarily going to happen in the big moment where everything is really intense. They're going to happen in one of the quieter moments where you can prepare and you can build and you can see how much you can get, how much energy you can get, how much participation you can get without necessarily that precipitating event. So completely hear you on, we are not operating with the level of intense reaction that is generated when, for example, your state is invaded by ICE and it institutes a reign of terror that is directly harming your neighbors. We are actually trying to see what can we get in a moment when people may not feel directly and immediately under threat, but they certainly do feel that something is terribly wrong with the system that they are living in.
Indeed. Christopher asks, Montana is introducing a ballot initiative that will prohibit corporations operating within the state from making any sort of political donations. Since states have the power to define what corporations are, they can determine what powers they have, and by eliminating corporations' power to make political donations, they are able to bypass Citizens United without it needing to be overturned. This is because if corporations do not have the power to make political donations, then the quote-unquote right to make political donations becomes meaningless. Should trying to pass similar ballot initiatives in all states be a priority for Indivisible? Should Indivisible groups in blue trifecta states be trying to push their state governments into making constitutional amendments limiting the power of corporations operating within their state? I love this, Leah. Personally, I've been tracking this. This is a relatively new entrepreneurial political idea coming out of the good government sectors of this space. And I think it's a creative idea to get around the fundamental problem that if you want to get citizens, but if you want to undo Citizens United currently, you don't just need to pass a law, you need to pass a constitutional amendment, which is extremely difficult given the control corporations have over our political system right now. Whereas this is something you can do at a state by state level. And I wouldn't say just do it in blue trifecta states. Those are obvious places to do it, but go ahead and fracture your Republican state legislature over this issue. Normal rank and file Republican voters don't want corporations treated as human beings with the right to buy elections. That's not a Republican value. That's not a conservative value. So I love this as a tactic. I will say I would absolutely support indivisible groups and statewide indivisible coalitions making this a top priority in their state to try to get it through. I think that's great. Indivisible national tends to do less on ballot initiatives at the state level, and we leave it up to our locals to lead the charge there. But I think this is absolutely a campaign worth pursuing. And it's something that could, I think, bring people over to our side. It's not just a blue state thing. Leah, any other thoughts on this specific tactic?
No, totally agree.
I mean, I'd say more generally beyond this, what we should be building towards in a 2029 scenario when we have the House, we have the Senate, and we have the presidency is substantial reform of our political system that more fully gets money out of politics and ensures that corporations and billionaires can't just buy members of Congress. That's something that can in part be done through legislation. But you have to build the political will to get there. And it's largely Republicans who oppose this, but it's not only Republicans. We need Democrats on board with substantial reforms to our democracy. Otherwise, we're not going to get it. That is not currently the focus for Indivisible because we're trying to get through the mess of 2026 midterms. But if we survive this year as a democracy, if we kick the Republicans out of the House and out of the Senate and take back Congress, attention will then turn to, well, what do we do next? When we have agenda setting power, what do we do? And I think this needs to be near, if not at the top of the list. Question from Amanda. Since a lot of tech bros have bent the knee, do you think we could add no tech use for the day, Facebook, Twitter, Google, to this general strike, or perhaps one in the future, keeping in mind that we should document the event, of course? We've talked about this from time to time, Leah, like how we are all using tech fascist owned infrastructure in order to build pro-democracy movements. And that's a tough reality. Yeah.
It's not great. It's not great. And we'll be the first to say that this is both a completely unacceptable state of affairs and also not one that I think most people feel like we've got the right theory of how you actually really use your leverage to collectively strike back. Obviously, we have worked very hard to move our communications over to Blue Sky, where we've got a really healthy community. If you are not part of that, definitely encourage you to join. But we also still maintain a presence on Instagram, right? Because we are reaching a lot of people there who maybe aren't going to move over or change their internet consumption patterns. I would say in general, in terms of no tech use for the day, I think that part of the value of these events really is creating the surround sound sense that this is something that lots of people are doing. A lot of the value here is, like the people we know, we're the kind of people who do stuff like this sense that comes with seeing other people in your extended social networks also participating in the same action you are. I am not sure that kind of cutting off the internet part of that is ultimately going to serve your objectives, or certainly is not going to get the kind of non-participation with these sites that would really meaningfully send that message. I think particularly with the sites that are algorithmic in nature, they're designed to fill holes, right? So if you don't post tomorrow, they're going to find some other content to put in that place. And, so it's not actually a situation where silence necessarily means that the site ends up being blank, because that's not how an algorithm functions. It fills in other content instead. So I start with both a hearty desire to have a better theory of the case here and a little skepticism about whether this is the right intervention.
It's a step below actually saying we're not going to use these sites, but I do have a pretty serious bias towards gathering in person, very old fashioned of me, but gathering in person on May Day and being in physical community with each other. I think ultimately, if we're going to push back against the election sabotage that is likely coming in 7 months, it's not going to be enough to just be posting a lot, regardless of what platform we're talking about, even if that's a Mastodon or a Blue Sky or one of our favorite platforms. It's going to happen that us pushing back successfully against the sabotage is going to happen successfully because we gather in person together, and building those community ties is core to how we view our organizing work now. This is why indivisible groups are geographically based. So you are organizing in your community to pressure institutions and leaders who represent or serve that community. So that doesn't mean that you might not be scrolling a Blue Sky or a Mastodon or searching on Google during that time, but I think if you make a focus, hey, we're not going to go work, we're not going to shop, what are we going to do? Hopefully, we're not just going to be alone in our houses. Hopefully, we're not just staying in our apartments. Like that's not the goal. You should be building connectivity some way, and I think the best way to do that is in person. Susan asks, I get that May Day is potentially valuable in terms of being a trial run for a general strike and signaling to Congress that we're serious. And I see how a general strike that targets corporations can result in indirect political pressure. But how does it help to involve small local businesses that don't have any lobbying power? I need to understand this if I'm going to go around asking local businesses to shut down on May Day. Susan, thank you for asking this question. It's something that's come up really since we've started talking about May Day, and we've tried to address this in some of the materials that we've put out. But Leah, do you want to talk a little bit about the logic of why should small businesses be a target here? They're not the enemies in this moment.
Yeah. So absolutely. So first of all, I would say there's a couple pieces here. The first is, we are trying to use this as a day in which we flex our power. And that means trying to make as significant an economic impact for the day as possible. The purpose of this is also like a jumping off for more and sustained organizing and engagement. So I would encourage you, when you're talking to small businesses, the ask is not just close for the day or let your employees go off for the day or put up a sign that's supportive for the day or et cetera, et cetera. The ask is actually about being part of a broader pro-democracy, pro-worker movement. And that's not going to just be about like you give us something. That's actually about us also being in relationship to each other. So, think about when you're thinking about your own spending, you're going to have the blackout for that day, but what are you going to do on Thursday? What are you going to do on Saturday for your small businesses? Are you going to make sure everyone knows which businesses were supportive of this ask so that other people understand that that's a place I should be patronizing on an ongoing basis? Part of the goal here is not, just to have a single day where everybody loses some money. It's also to say, these are people who are willing to stand with us, and let's stand with them on an ongoing basis. So think about it less as let's ask people to take a hit for the day, and more as let's ask people to be part of this, and we're going to be part of it with them.
Are there any groups, Leah, that are doing like a small business Saturday following the May Day on the Friday?
Oh, I don't
kind
know.
of
That's a
like
really
that
cool idea.
idea.
I'm
So that
into it.
especially just what you said there about identifying the businesses who are on our side, on the side of democracy, on the side of their
Yeah.
communities, and then saying, hey, here are all the good ones. Let's all go there this weekend. Let's all make a point of going there this weekend. I love that.
Yeah. Like say who stood with you, right? So that
Yeah.
people understand that. That's part of what we were thinking when we did our Signs for Solidarity campaign, when Siembra, North Carolina, has done really great Fourth Amendment workplace organizing. We actually want to be identifying the local businesses who are willing to stand up for immigrant rights, who are willing to stand with workers, who are willing to say this is not okay in one way or another. And then we want to support them.
I'm seeing Jennifer in the chat is saying Washington, D.C. is doing a small business Saturday, and we got Gina saying
Amazing.
that they are also doing a small business Saturday. This is great. We should talk about this more, and maybe we'll
Yeah.
go back to the team and ask, are there any resources we can put together for some ideas about how to orchestrate that? That sounds great. Thank you for the question. Robert asks, Robert from CBFD Indivisible, perhaps the Indivisible group that gets the most questions every week in every What's the Plan? You're asking good questions, Robert. Our local PBS affiliate recently reported that Global X and Eastern Air Express are running deportation flights out of San Diego area, with many of them departing from one of the local military bases. What can we do to stop reduce these flights? Perhaps a campaign like the one last year on Avello. And let me remind y'all, the Avello Airlines boycott campaign, that worked. That worked. That pressure campaign led by Indivisible groups and many others effectively shamed that airline into stopping these deportation flights last year. It was one of the bright spots of corporate pressure activity and a real black eye for the regime trying to bully these corporations into flying. And I will say myself, as somebody who has literally never flown Avello before, just flew Avello Airlines this weekend because we're not boycotting them anymore. And Reverend Barber was hosting a conference and invited me out, and I flew Avello Airlines straight to the conference, and I had a great time. So boycotts work. If you,
Okay.
what, Leah, you're giving me side eye?
I'm giving a little bit of a side eye there. Yeah. We don't need to go all the way to saying that we're really enjoying using their services afterwards. It is true that part of a boycott is saying we are willing to eventually use your product again. Like that's,
I think
they don't really
key.
have an incentive to back off if that's not the case. But
I
but
think
I'm
that's
still going to give them the
key.
side eye. Yeah.
Here's what I say. I think you give them the side eye as long as they're doing the bad thing. But if you are not willing to put your money where your mouth is, what is the actual threat? What are you actually doing here? It's not like I'm going out and searching for Avelo Airlines flights everywhere I'm going. But before, had this happened last year and I saw Avelo had the best flight going to where we were going, I wouldn't have flown them because we're part of a boycott and I'm not willing to fly the airline if they're part of the boycott. But now I am. So which is all to say, yes, Robert, I think this has worked in the past. There's no reason to recreate the wheel, to reinvent it. I like the idea of going and looking at the lessons that we learned from the Avelo Airlines campaign and applying that to Global X and Eastern Air Express. I'm also going to take a screenshot of your question and I'm going to flag it for the team. Let's see if we can move together on this. I'll make a note of it. Becky asks, what can we learn from the outcome in Hungary? Lee, you covered this a bit, but I believe it was 79% of voters who voted in the election. Is this the number we need for our upcoming election to override any voter suppression and vote rigging?
Well, there are a lot of lessons that we can learn from Hungary around the importance of local organizing, around the importance of collectively calling the bluff of a regime that really rules by cowing people into obedience, around independent media and the importance of supporting that independent media and figuring out ways to reach people outside of corporate-controlled distribution channels. I think what you're specifically asking about is really this intersection of voter turnout, size of electoral victory, and ability to stop fraud, sabotage, overturning of results. And just to be real, this was something that organizers in Hungary were very, very concerned about heading into this weekend, right? Was the sense of, he's got a whole set of ways that he's trying to rig this up front, and then he's going to have a whole set of ways that he tries to overturn or sabotage or mess with the results on the back end. And it is absolutely the case that part of what happened here was they won in the kind of numbers where tinkering at the margins is not going to actually get you the result that you want. And we should all be inspired by that. We certainly want to win by the kinds of margins that are extraordinarily decisive and that are so incredible that, fighting for one Senate seat is not going to tip the balance of the Senate because we've won all of them, right? We're going to go for that. We're going to try for that. And also, I think what is powerful here is that they blended their electoral turnout and their election protection and their mobilization in a way that showed that there wasn't, just winning the election and there wasn't just safeguarding the election. There was a powerful, mobilized, well-organized national movement that could both turn people out and that could mobilize and that could demonstrate they were completely capable of enforcing the results. And that collective set of demonstrations created the conditions in which Orban conceded without meaningfully trying to challenge.
The best anti-election sabotage.
Ezra, you're on mute.
Oops. The best anti-election sabotage effort is really just overwhelming margins, and you also can't count on that. So you got to prepare for closer elections as well. Becky, Jean now asks, Jean from Indivisible, Oregon, please consider impeachment in terms of the midterms. Unless the Democratic members of Congress repeatedly call for impeachment, it sends a message that they are okay with all this, and most of them are only going to call for impeachment if their constituents clamor for it. Please urge people to call on their members of Congress and primary opponents to oppose this regime with all of the tools available to them. This is not about removal, but it's about showing the voters what they would do with the majority and why they deserve one. I saw recent polling showing that impeachment actually does have majority support in the country now. The case is building as this regime just further beclowns itself and causes international chaos and national economic catastrophe. So, Leah, we talk about impeachment almost every week on this show. We get a question about this. Yeah. And I think individually and Indivisible as an organization, obviously this guy should be impeached. Obviously he should be out of office. The way we approach this is mainly in a strategic question. Like, does this help us win the election or not is basically the question. Do you have updated thinking on this as the data gets worse and worse for Trump?
So here's what I would say on this. I think that sometimes we can shorthand this conversation in a way that's sort of like, does he merit impeachment? And the answer is obviously he merits impeachment. And also, if impeachment and calling for impeachment was a magical button that transformed the political environment, we wouldn't have already seen him impeached twice and back in office, right? We have seen him impeached multiple times now, and none of that stopped him from being able to mount a credible campaign in 2024 and win an alarming number of voters. And so I think we've got to think about this not as, is there a procedural remedy for what is fundamentally a political problem? First, we have to think of everything in terms of how do we fracture his coalition? How do we pull more people to our side? How do we collectively create the conditions in which, to the last question's point, we massively win the next election and we have the political and popular movement that's capable of enforcing the results and ensuring a transition of power. Those are the terms in which we think of it. And the reason why we don't lean into impeachment as the central campaigning demand is because we think there are other issues where we can reach more of those people. We can fracture his coalition more effectively. We can pull more people who need to hear something from us that is about their personal circumstances, that is about the issues that are hurting them, that is about the story of why their life will be better in the future once we get this guy out, right? I think the most immediate example here is when we're talking about the war. The war has massive, massive disapproval, including within a decent amount of Trump's coalition and amongst non-voters. We would rather have a conversation about the fact that your money is being taken out of healthcare and taken out of schools and taken out of roads and going towards bombs that are bombing Iranian schoolgirls. We would rather have that conversation with people who are going to feel that in a real and visceral way than get into an argument about kind of the legalities of various things. Is it illegal? Yes, it's obviously massively illegal. And also, we've got a decent amount of evidence right now that the first conversation we have to have with people is about how it is impacting them personally before we can have an argument about the procedural and legal pieces of this. And so, I wish we were in the circumstances in which we felt like impeachment was the right thing to do right now. A lot of what we're doing is about recovering the political circumstances in which that makes sense.
Leah, can I push you on something?
Yeah, please.
Literally today, and with the support of a little organization by the name of Indivisible, Rep Ansari, a great rep from Arizona, just introduced formal articles of impeachment against Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Yeah. So we are on board right now, as are many of our allies, with impeaching the Secretary of War. Can you talk about why that and not actively pushing other impeachment? Yeah, it's a great example of this specific thing, which is that this is a toxification play about how a war that no one wanted has been launched, how it is being conducted, how it is putting Americans in harm's way, how it is driving up our prices. It is a vehicle to have that fight with, and to specifically have that fight in relation to one of the most toxic and embarrassing and awful characters within the Trump administration, Pete Hegseth, who, we have a lot of evidence. Possibly one of the drunkest. We don't know. We're going to need some investigations. Unfortunately, I think there might be a competition for that, but certainly amongst the drunkest. So I would say, again, we see impeachment as a tool within the broader toolbox where we're thinking about it in terms of what are the set of campaigns, narratives, issues that we're driving in and making salient to people so that we build towards the biggest possible popular movement against Trumpism and so that we build ultimately to the biggest possible electoral majorities. Now, simultaneously, we're also running a primary program that is designed to stiffen the spines of Democrats and create fighters who will then use the power that we have built in order to actually hold these people accountable. Those two things are not in tension for us. They are, in fact, literally what we are doing. Leah, I'm seeing a lot of pushback in the chat because I use the term Secretary of War and why'd you do that? Well, it's interesting. We might not agree on this, but I tend to think that they've made a strategic mistake by calling a department that they're trying to fund to the tune of $1.5 trillion, the Department of War, which most people don't like war, instead of the Department of Defense, which who can argue against defense? So I'm honestly mixed on this, but when I saw them do it, I thought it was first that they don't actually have the legal ability to just unilaterally choose to name it something else. And so it was another violation of the law. But as a strategic messaging play, I thought it was a mistake on their end. And I'm not convinced we should just say, no, we're changing it back to the Department of Defense because we love a $1 trillion Department of Defense. I am fine saying, we should be cutting funds to war. It is stupid that we're spending that much money on war instead of supporting our own Americans. I'm not settled on this, but I do think there's an argument there.
This is an interesting point. It is a more direct explanation of a lot of the functions that we are currently objecting to. It's not it, so you're not obeying in advance. You're not going to be calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America,
No.
but you are open to allowing them to reveal the true nature of what they're trying to do here
Well,
via their own words.
one of the absurdities of this moment is we are at war with Iran that the regime says is not a war being led by the Department of War that they illegally named to call it the Department of War. Uh, I'm happy to give in and call
Irony
it
stuff.
yes it is the yes it is the War Department. Yes, they are waging war illegally and unconstitutionally on Iran, and yes, we should cut funding to that and refuse to give them one more dime for it. Again, I think this is mainly an empirical question of what works better, but I don't instinctually think that we should go back to defense because that helps us more. Ken asked from Indivisible Nova West, what can we do to confront Trump on the 4th of July? Obviously, the 250th anniversary of the founding of the country. There are going to be big spectacle celebrations, both from this regime and elsewhere. How are we thinking of going from now to May Day to Flag Day on June 14th to July 4th, Leah?
It's a great question. So, short answer is we're working on a plan. And the long answer is we would like your ideas as part of the process of building out that plan. July 4th, obviously, enormously significant in our nation's history. This will be the 250th anniversary. It is a very big deal. July 4th is also historically a date that we've gotten a lot of feedback from the network, from organizers, from activists around when we try to explore organizing opportunities. And that is because July 4th is also a weekend that people enjoy traveling and spending with their family and going to barbecues. And so a lot of the feedback tends to be something along the lines of, a third of my people are not in town with me, including a bunch of my organizing crew. This is not an optimal date for me to be pulling off a highly complex logistical operation, a mobilization. I may personally not be in town myself. And so what we're going to be thinking about for
Wait,
July 4th.
where are we going? Who's watching?
Where
Who's
are we
watching the
going?
kids?
The hypothetical organizer may not be in town themselves. I don't believe you and I have any plans. But for people who are cooler than us, who do have plans for the 4th of July, it's a little bit of a tough date to organize around. And so which is all to say that we will definitely be thinking about what are interventions that we can do for that window, June 14th through July 14th. We know this is going to be a high symbolism, high significance period. And also, we start with a pretty high degree of skepticism about actions that require physical presence and a lot of labor over a holiday weekend that many people do take off.
I think look, all eyes are on May Day right now, y'all, and I'm very reluctant to call for anything national before the completion of another thing national that we're all building towards. But I do think there's something about the connection between Flag Day on June 14th, which also happens to be Donald Trump's 80th birthday, which also happens to be the day that he is holding a ridiculous UFC fight on the White House lawn. That's June 14th. Which is also the 1-year anniversary of No Kings Won, and then a few weeks later, July 4th. And I would like to see some connectivity between the two of these things, including if it's just indivisible groups and others doing something on June 14th and then carrying something that they've created into the July 4th parades. We'll be working on this, rest assured. And also, I don't want to distract from building as much as possible for May Day, which is in just a couple weeks. I think a commitment that you can have from us by May Day, we will have a more defined plan for June 14th and July 4th. Elaine from Connecticut Shoreline Indivisible, is ICE still operating as brutally as it was several months ago? I hear minimally about it anymore.
Good question.
The part of this is just an empirical question, and that the empirical data shows arrests are significantly down since the regime met defeat. Huh?
Detentions.
Detentions are significantly down since the regime met defeat in the Twin Cities. That is real. We don't know, though, is that just a Nome being kicked out and there being a change in leadership? Are they taking a breath and then they're going to ramp up again? We don't know yet. But it would be wrong to say that the problem is over and that it's not going to come back. What is right to say is that the detentions are down and the regime learned that this is a political loser for them and they have to tread very carefully. whether that means this is over, I think that's a big question. My guess is no.
I do also just want to be clear. They're down. They're not down. They are still a massive and alarming and horrifying fact of life for far too many of our neighbors around the country. And in fact, just in the last week, we've gotten reports of another, of horrifying acts of violence against civilians by ICE. So I would encourage us to think about this as a situation in which they've made a decision that their overt use of violence and state terror has backfired, and so they want to keep it off the headlines and out of the news, which does not in any way mean that they are not continuing a reign of terror in a lot of places. And I think Minnesota would be the first to say that, right? Like,
Yeah.
ICE is not actually gone from Minnesota. They are still there. They are certainly dramatically less present than they were at the height of the occupation, but I don't want to overstate what's happened here. They have made a decision to dial this back in terms of the videos of detentions, the kind of horrifying right wing propaganda machine emphasis on this. But that does not mean that this is not still happening in our communities, and it does not mean that we do not need to do everything we can to organize our own communities against it.
Speaking of doing everything we can to organize our communities against this, Leah, next week, next Saturday, so April 25th, there is a national day of action against the camps that are being constructed with horrible conditions to house those who are being detained. Indivisible is running this along with a great partner, Detention Watch Network. You have already heard some from us on this. We hosted a call last night with thousands of organizers all around the country. If you go to indivisible.org, you can find a recording of that training and that info session. But it is April 25th, a national day of action, that I would encourage everybody who is worried about these concentration camps being constructed in their own states to participate in. This is not something that's only happening in Minnesota. This is not something that's only happening in red states. This is also not something that is supported by Republicans on the ground in all places or even in Congress. There was a really powerful and inspiring example in Tennessee of local organizers pushing back against one of these camps, and Marsha Blackburn, a right-wing conservative, feeling the heat enough that she herself had to come out against it. So I do think it's important for us to not take our foot off the gas when they're backing off of the headlines. This is still an active campaign on their part, and they still have billions upon billions of dollars to invest in this, and they're scared of our nonviolent but insistent organizing. That's why you're not hearing as much about it right now. So it's working. We should keep it up, and in fact, I think we should be accelerating our campaigning against this work. We're winning the fight, y'all. We are winning the political fight, and we're making policy wins all across the country on this. Let's keep at it. Don't just stop because the regime is scared. Stephen asks, one of the biggest global stories about the resistance against right-wing authoritarianism was the defeat of Viktor Orban in the Hungarian election on Sunday. While not a perfect comparison with the situation in the U.S., are there any immediate lessons that we can take from this election in our own struggle against an authoritarian government? I think we covered that, Stephen. Leah, are there any additional thoughts we have? There was that great piece that I think we posted in the chat and we'll send around as well with specific lessons to extract. Everything is what it is and not something else. America is America. It is not Hungary. Orban is Orban and not Trump. That is real. And also the rise of authoritarianism across the globe is real. It is not just a U.S. phenomenon, which means some of the lessons that we're learning from places like Hungary or Chile or Argentina or Poland or you name it, where they're experiencing authoritarianism, those lessons can teach us something all around the world. And we should be extracting lessons from these fights. And for the reasons, Leah, you stated earlier, that the right wing in America freaking loved Orban, loves Orban. I mean, they viewed him. The quote that really struck me was Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, one of the architects of Project 2025, speaking about Hungary. He said, it's not a model for right-wing statecraft. It is the model for right-wing statecraft. That's what Kevin Roberts, one of the architects of Project 2025. So it's difficult to overstate just how much the American fascist movement looked to Hungary and said, "Oh, we want more of that. We want to do that." And if people are interested, there is a great piece put out. I wrote about it in the newsletter this past weekend. A great piece put out in October of 2024, which I think probably a lot of people missed it, but it was called "The Urbanization of America."
Yeah.
And it's a long report with a deep dive in the connection between the American authoritarian movement and Hungary, and how much the architects of Project 2025 and what we're seeing now were just learning as many lessons as they could from Hungary. And you know what? They're going to learn a really hard lesson in November from Hungary again.
I will say so. This is a week in which the worst people in the world are pretty freaked out, and that's really good. That's good. And while I think we have talked enough about the lessons, I do not think we've actually dunked on JD Vance enough for this call. So let me just go back to that a little bit. So JD Vance, right? On Friday, he is in Hungary campaigning for a government that will shortly face a massive electoral wipeout. He then flies to negotiations with Iran, which fail. He then gets into a weird, awkward fight with the Pope, trying to defend his boss's completely insane series of comments. And then as of yesterday, he went to Georgia for a Turning Points event at which there were approximately 10 people in the audience, and most of them were heckling him. So JD Vance has had the worst week. And that is, I wish him many more of the same. That's all. That's all I got here.
That's enough, Leah. That's enough. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Steve from LA. The evil Trump MAGA Republican axis is hard at work on a big ugly bill 2, also called Reconciliation 2.0, to cover the cost of the Iran war fiasco, while dramatically increasing the regular military budget, paid for with massive additional cuts to the healthcare and the broader social safety net. What's the plan? Good question. To fight this, can you identify all the vulnerable and retiring Republican congressmen to rally the local Indivisible and allied groups to loudly and visibly protest everywhere in their districts, at their offices, gas stations affected, healthcare facilities, VA hospitals, farms being foreclosed, small businesses going bankrupt, etc., to try to get enough Republicans to stand up and vote no this time? We need to flip fewer than 5 votes, right? Right. And where official post-primary Democratic candidates have been selected, shouldn't we connect with their campaigns to get them to join the demonstrations as a warm-up for their fall campaigns? Steve, you named it,
You
man.
built the plan.
That is the plan. That is exactly the plan. And just to say, for folks who aren't following this closely, Big Ugly Bill originally passed just with Republican votes. This is what got us the massive investment in ICE that we're dealing with right now. The thing about reconciliation is you can do it on a party line vote. The thing about reconciliation in an election year, when you've got a declining authoritarian clown who is losing support everywhere and his coalition is fracturing, it's a lot harder to do it then. You only need to peel off a few Republican votes, and many of these Republicans are looking at Trump's approval ratings, and they're looking at the way the political winds are blowing in their own district, and they're looking at how soon the midterm elections are, and they're suddenly becoming less scared of Trump primarying them because their primaries are over, and more scared that their voters are going to end their political careers. And we need to make that fear just dominant in their political calculus as they choose whether to vote or not. And the way to do that is to show up in person and put pressure on to make sure that the people who aren't paying attention as much as we are understand that Jeff Hurd could vote for a reconciliation bill that is going to close more rural hospitals to support the regime, to raise tariffs, to support the regime, to wage a war that nobody freaking wants. But if people don't hear about that, then it's not going to influence their vote. If we don't influence their vote, Jeff Hurd is probably going to do the shitty, cowardly thing and just back the regime. So this is bread and butter for Indivisible. This is how we got started, pushing Republicans to be scared of their own constituents so they do the right thing. And if they don't do the right thing, then we defeat them in November. So, Steve, I think you laid it out pretty succinctly about how to do this. You can expect more from Indivisible with specific talking points and guidance for how to do this, but you don't need to wait for us. You do not need to be an expert in reconciliation process or the budget process generally, or any of these policy items to put together a pressure campaign for your individual Republican member of Congress. You have legitimacy because you are a constituent. That's all you need in order to do this. But you as an individual constituent, unless you're super rich or super famous, you don't have much power. The way to actually wield your power is to gather in a group. It could be an Indivisible group if that floats your boat, but it can be any group. Just be a group locally based in that district. That's how you're going to actually be able to push these folks. Leah, any other thoughts from our past campaigns trying to push Republicans to be scared of their own constituents? Okay. Joe asked, members of our group suggested Saturday, July 4th, the 250th anniversary of the USA, as the next No King's Day, or possibly make it July 4th weekend long thing. Thoughts from Joe with Indivisible ADK Saratoga. As a reminder, the poll that we did said 27% of American voters want to attend the next No Kings. That's a representative poll of American voters, a wild statistic. Leah, should July 4th be No King's Day? In many ways, July 4th is the original No King's Day, you could say.
Right. Yeah. So like spiritually, July 4th is absolutely No King's Day. And also practically speaking, for all the reasons that we talked about earlier, it's just a challenging day to ask the regular people who organize these events all over the country to collectively hold up and run an event at the magnitude and intensity that a No Kings requires. That does not mean that we're not going to explore all kinds of cool interventions. As I mentioned, being part of your town's 4th of July parade with a No Kings message or with an American flag message, right? There's a lot of things that we can definitely do and look into, and we're going to be thinking about them. And also, I would say it is unlikely that that's going to be a No King style mass mobilization where we're trying to get millions of people out into the streets.
That's right. Leah, I do want to cover this. I know we're a bit over time, but we haven't talked about Eric Swalwell yet. And I do think it's important to cover what's been happening on Capitol Hill. So Teresa asks, can you speak as former congressional staffers about the subjective environment that allows the sexual and other abuse of staff?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so few things. Capitol Hill has historically been a pretty terrible place for kind of baseline worker protections. It's really like environments are extraordinarily dependent on the office, the temperament of the member, et cetera. Personally, I worked for the most amazing human in the world. So our office was awesome. And the only problem was too much fun and too many Tea Party people trying to get in all the time. But also
the other key structure of these offices is your entire job as a staffer is to support the boss. You support the boss. How do you help the boss? How do you support the boss? How do you make them look good? How do you prepare them? How do you guard them from danger? Like that is your role as a congressional staffer or as a campaign staffer. So you work yourself to the bone in order to do that. And that's how the entire office, a high functioning office, that's how it's oriented.
Yeah, I mean, and there's like healthier and happier ways to articulate that specific thing. But, fundamentally, everyone's job depends on the reelection of the person who is the member of Congress, right? And so that's going to create some pretty fucked up dynamics if you don't have strong workplace protections and a strong culture that is set by leadership. Now, there have been some improvements in some places since, like, we were on the Hill, 15 years ago, and there was, nothing like the unionization movement that has moved through a bunch of progressive congressional offices. There was, far less in the way of a sense of any kind of protections for anyone. And also there's a really long way to go, just candidly. Like, this is, I don't want to speak for folks because, again, I haven't been there for 15 years now. And also, like, this is one of many environments where, because the political world is small, because there is still far too much toleration of, abusive and harassment dynamics, like, this has happened. And, we're really heartily aware that this is not the only place on Capitol Hill where this has happened. It's the place that's breaking out into the public because Eric Swalwell was running for governor.
I think it's what's important for those of us who are political organizers is that if we discover that somebody in our coalition is a slimeball or a sexual abuser, we got to call for them to step down, even if it's politically inconvenient, even if it causes trouble. Look, I think this is something that needs to separate what we're doing from what the Republicans are doing, supporting a rapist in chief, supporting abusers all throughout their party, covering up for an entire Epstein class that is systematically abusing young women. That this can't be something that we engage in just because it's a political inconvenience to not call out folks on our side who engage in that behavior. If we want a better party, we've got to demand it. And I appreciate the Indivisible groups in Eric Swalwell's district who, though they had a good relationship with the office, though they appreciated some of the stances he took and some of the speeches he gave, when they read that article, when they saw the evidence, they said, yeah, this guy's got to go. No question about it. And I do think that's a standard we can hold while still building a political majority. These two things aren't in conflict with each other. I think that's how we build a party that people actually believe in. Well, with that, we've got A lot of work in our future. We've got May Day coming up at the end of the month. Before that, we've got this National Day of Action on the detention centers on April 25th. If you missed the national call on that on April 14th, you can go and find that at indivisible.org. We've got primaries all over the country. Find yourself a Peggy Flanagan in Minnesota. Find yourself a Julie Gonzalez in Colorado. Find yourself a Jasmine Clark in Georgia. Find yourself a candidate who you believe is the future of the party and put your energy behind them. Rebuild this party into something that people can believe in. That's how we get a party that actually inspires and can crush this regime as badly as the Hungarians crushed the Orban regime. That's where we're headed, folks. In 7 months, we're going to be celebrating like Hungarians here in America with a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate and driving towards Democratic trifecta in 2029 that can actually turn this democracy into one that reflects the will of the people. And part of the way we do this is in these weekly calls and conversations and podcasts. So we will see you next week at the normal time, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern time for What's the Plan? And the podcast will be available, as always, the next day, wherever you get your podcast. Please rate, review, share, etc. Thanks, everybody.